Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. I would like to welcome you all to this Urban Thinkers Campus. A big thanks to the speakers and the organization, ISOCARP, Arcadis, Commonwealth Association of Planners, Institut Paris Région. Thank you for coming, for joining this campus session on planning and design for pandemic urban resilience. This campus is part of the dedicated UTC series on the COVID-19 crisis. It is an initiative of the World Urban Campaign. It is also part of UN Habitat COVID-19 campaign that is meant to give a voice to all those engaged in the response to the pandemic. Since 2015, we have organized more than 150 campuses, engaging about 45,000 participants worldwide. And this new series has three objectives. Number one, to present current action on the ground in different contexts, analyze good practices and solutions in the different domains of action to address the response to the COVID-19 crisis, and finally to extract lessons from the crisis and make recommendations for building resilience in cities and communities. Those recommendations will be shared widely and will serve as advice to city and community leaders, as well as to national governments. Welcome all. Before I invite the speakers, I'd like to share with you the social media handles and hashtag that you can use during that session. So this is my name. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm coordinator of the World Urban Campaign. And these are the hashtags that I would like to encourage you to use. Take Action for Cities, Urban Thinkers, and please tag Urban Campaign and UN Habitat. So this campus will have two different parts, main parts. So first, the Urban Thinkers session, where we'll have a number of panelists to talk about the subject. And secondly, we'll have a roundtable interactive where we'd like you to intervene as attendees. You can raise your hands as attendees in the chat. You can actually ask if you want to speak in the roundtable discussion. And then you can also ask questions in the Q&A. So you can ask questions directly to the speakers, and you can also ask very more general questions as you feel. So now we have 6 speakers. Milena Ivkovic, who is coordinator of the Urban Planning Advisory Team at ISOCARP. Bert Smolder, who is a shelter program manager at Arcadis. Ian Tant, who is Vice President of the Commonwealth Association of Planners. Eric Wibrecht, who is Senior Architect and Regional Urban Planner at Institut Paris Région. Didier Van Kussem, Director of the ISOCARP Institute, and Javier Toner, Urban Development Specialist at UN Habitat. So I would like to invite Milena as a first speaker to make a presentation. Milena, over to you.
Thank you, Christine, so much, and thank you for inviting us to be part of this special session of the Urban Thinkers Campus. And both ISOCARP and ISOCARP Institute are members of the World Urban Campus, and we have been supporting this initiative for many years. Let me start with the first slide. As some of you may know, can we go to the first slide, Christine? Yes. As some of you may know, ISOCARP is International Society of City and Regional Planners. And we were founded in 1965 in the Netherlands. So we are more than 50 years already the main knowledge center for urban planning worldwide internationally. We organize each year our World Planning Congress, and the Congress of this year is taking place in Doha, in Qatar, with the main topic of post-oil city. But somehow all these events, all these unprecedented events of this year has inspired us to add some new titles and new tracks to our Congress, and to try to think what can we do as planners and what are the urgent questions in the post-pandemic resilience for cities. So we really are now redesigning the tracks of our Congress to be more relevant to the urgencies around the cities. Next, please. Yeah. Can I go to the next slide?
It's taking a bit of time, I think.
Okay,
Because...
good. So there are several actions we have undertaken as a society. Just to remind you, we are a member-based society, meaning that we unify a lot of urban planning professionals around the globe, whether they are academics or coming from the urban planning practice. One of the first steps, first actions we took as a society was in the early months of the pandemic was to formulate a think piece or a kind of isocarp statement on post-COVID urbanism. I have to say that we have written this statement many times over and over again because the situation in the cities was changing very fast, and the situation in the regions and different parts of the world was changing very fast. But at the end, what we could conclude are several main points, and what we see that it's very important for the urban development in the coming years and months is to somehow respond to the economic crisis that emerged as a result of the pandemic. We need to work more on increasing the resilience of communities in very wide meaning of the word. Resilience to these kind of pandemics, but also resilience to many other factors. We have seen that public space has been really traumatized, and one of the first victims in this pandemic. All the restrictions, all the social distancing, and everything we know now has taken place in public space. Last month, we have witnessed also major shifts in urban mobility. Some cities are really now completely redeveloping and rethinking their approach to urban mobility and choosing for more sustainable ways. And finally, what this pandemic has brought to our minds is that we need some kind of new consciousness about health, environment, and climate, and the interrelation between these three factors and the cities. So if I can go to the next slide, I will then talk about the other activity of our society. We are also members of the HPF, Habitat Professionals Forum, which is part of UN Habitat and widely supported by UN Habitat. Habitat Professional Forum is an organization, an umbrella organization of all other different professional planning organizations from different parts of the world. And we started somehow at the beginning of the pandemic, we started immediately a dialogue on how can we make a kind of joint statement on post-COVID urban development. And from the Isocarp Society point of view, we took the responsibility to conduct a survey among more than 50 professional planning associations, which are part of the HPF, because we wanted very strongly to have an evidence-based joint statement. So not just on what we see in the news or how we personally experience the pandemic, but really what do we think as professionals are the relevant topics. And the survey has been taken for 2 or 3 weeks. We had a very good amount of respondents. And what you see here is some kind of analysis, which topics have been found as the most relevant topics for the future of urban planning and post-pandemic recovery. We will make a full report, but what is more important, I think, is that we are now working on the next steps and making a roadmap for the recovery. So it's not just trying to react on what is happening, but also setting the next step on how to be prepared for every other pandemic that may come our way. Let's go to the next slide. Maybe just to add to the survey, we had more than 30 questions in this survey and more than 80 different respondents to those questions. As I said, within the society, we have mapped several main topics where we could really focus as planning professionals. But you know, during to the all the isolation restrictions and quarantine, there is actually very little you can do in those restricted environments. So, of course, we started a series of webinars, a series of online presence. We didn't want to lose the momentum to really use the crisis as a way to look, to consolidate our knowledge, to put it in a more digital format and try to reach more and more people with certain messages. And we definitely focused a lot on public space. And a lot of webinars have been going on around the different topics of public space. And we have used many of our networks and associate partners to organize those webinars. Let's go to the next one. And to end on these notes on how can we continue working as planners, and how can we, let's say, still help recover the cities, and how can we take action on sustainable development goals even from the quarantine. We are continuing our presence in the digital sphere and organizing a large webinar on the in the 9th of June on the focus on South Africa and focus on South African post-pandemic planning. So I think this is, to conclude on my presentation, I think these times of crisis should be really seen as an opportunity to try to develop all different kind of knowledge transfers that we may not did in the past. And now with a lot of new tools, we are able to disseminate the knowledge much better. What we see as a big challenge as a society is, of course, that a lot of our actions and projects we did with our partners on the ground are now suffering because still there are some restrictions in different parts of the world, but we hope that that will be solved. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present these small spectrum of actions.
Thank you, Milena. ISOCAP is really active, engaging in learning from this crisis.
Yes.
As you said, it's a learning process, and it's an opportunity to redefine the urban space. Yep. I think it would be great to know a little bit more about the result of the survey. I could see that the priorities are on basic services and healthcare.
Yes.
So maybe you can later on, after the question and answer.
Yes, sure. I will gladly do that if there are more questions about the survey, because it's really completely, you know, that statement is evidence-based on the responses on the survey.
Okay. Thank you, Milena.
Thank you, Christine.
So now I'm going to invite Bert Smolder, who is a shelter program manager at Arcadis. Bert, over to you.
Thank you. Can you share my screen?
Yes. Can you see it? Or
the host disabled participants screen sharing, it says. Yes. Okay. Thanks. It's clear now, eh?
Yes, we can see the screen.
And then I go to the full mode.
Okay, I stop sharing. You want to share yours?
Yeah,
okay.
Sure, if that's possible.
Okay, yeah.
Because then you get the full screen.
Yes.
Is it clear?
We don't see it yet.
Otherwise, we go back to yours. You don't see it? I shared it with...
I don't see it.
Okay, let's go back to yours. I don't want to waste time for that. Okay, thanks, Christine. Well, thanks first to you and to the Secretariat of the World Urban Campaign. I think you did a great job and are doing a great job organizing these Urban Thinkers campuses. Of course, in the previous years, there have been many. It's one of the most important modes for you and Habitat to share the message of the new urban agenda and Habitat 3. But I think Milena talked about making problems into challenges and opportunities. I think the way that these Urban Thinkers campus are now organized online is a great example how this can be done. And that's also, of course, a thanks applies to Damien and to Flossie who are supporting you. Next, please. Yeah, maybe it's good to introduce briefly the shelter program. Many of you will know what is the shelter program. It's the corporate social responsibility partnership between UN Habitat and Arcadis, which is a large engineering consultancy firm, 27,000 people, so that's quite large. And over the last 10 years, we've been engaged with UN Habitat for 10 years now. We supported 120 missions all over the world. We organized together with UN Habitat 9 academies for knowledge transfer. We are sponsoring the World Urban Campaign. But of course, now we cannot support on location. So we discussed with UN Habitat to support for COVID-19. And the way we do it is to have a rapid response help desk for questions related to COVID-19. And we're working on that. So anything for water, mobility, for buildings can be asked and answered. The support of the conversion of hotels to medical facilities with checklist. We activated the Shelter Academy Alumni Network. And of course, we support the World Urban Campaign, Urban Thinkers campuses, especially now also with the pandemic resilient cities. And we have a group working on it who also supported on this issue. Next, please. Yeah, what does it mean, pandemic resilience? I think everybody all over the world is now familiar with flattening the curve. And that's one of the main strategies which has been adopted in order to let the medical care take care of the patients. It's important not to have too many patients at the same time. So the whole idea of flattening the curve is take measures that the pandemic doesn't spread that quickly. There are ways to do it. Many countries immediately went to lockdown restrictions, avoided interactions, working from home. Now this kind of webinars like this also helps, of course, not meeting each other. Avoid contamination, social distancing, no touch facilities, and medical emergency response. But the question is, of course, what does it mean for our profession? What does it mean for the development of cities? Next, please. The question is, what should it mean that you completely close every activity in a city? Should the reaction be that we have to design a city as a prison? Of course, that would be, for some, would that be the easiest way? Just everybody stays inside. That was also the way that some governments immediately started their reaction. But the question if that's the best way, and especially on the long term, the question if that's a wrong measure, or is it a false contradiction? Is it a contradiction between health and economy? Is it a contradiction between health and freedom? Or should we find ways that we combine the health requirements with the economy, the health requirements with, as much as possible, civil freedom? That we design a healthy city for a maximal individual health resilience. Next, please. And we think that's the challenge, that we make these cities health-proof, but at the same time, we make these cities livable. Maybe it's a way a bit like we also work in other situations, that we, this is a scheme which is derived from the flood resistance. And in flood resistance, we have the prevention, adaptation, the protection, and the preparation. And maybe that's also a way that we can deal with the pandemic crisis. First of all, prevent and adapt. And the way we do that plan for healthy cities, green and safe. We've seen how important it is for people to have this green in their neighborhood, that the children can go out nearby and don't have to go to distances far away. Protections, that we have enough space in the public space for social distancing, that we have facilities for washing hands, all these kind of things. And then, of course, the level 3 preparation, that we prepare medical facilities and quarantine facilities for outbreaks. And we can have permanent, but also makeshift conversions and a focused management system. Next, please. This multi-layer safety may be the way to deal with pandemics on the longer term. But it would be good to start with this basic thing, this adaptation. And in a way, the opportunity to make our cities more livable is already there. It's not only to do with physical health, it also has to do with psychological health. Lockdowns have a lot of psychological negative problems. Directly, that people feel, of course, like they're in a prison, but of course also in interaction. There's a lot of abuse when families have to stay a long time in their houses locked up. And it's so important to have space nearby where you can go out and just enjoy yourself. And the green city is a healthy city, and health, of course, also has to do with resistance, that you get more healthy battling with your own system for the pandemic. It's important to have access to green nearby, and at the same time, of course, it improves the air quality. Next, please. It's important to see the pandemic in a wider context, also that health resilience. Traffic safety is also one. Of course, one of the positive things, you can say positive or negative, is that the diminished interaction has led to much less traffic deaths. When you realize that yearly 1.35 million deaths occur in traffic, there's no lockdown for cars. But at the same time, of course, this pandemic resilient city could take care of that. It's important to promote walking, safe streets, electric bicycles. There's a surge in many countries now in the buying of bicycles. And also it used to be very difficult to cycle in hot climates. But now in hotter places, you see everywhere that electric bicycles are a solution. In the bottom of this picture, you see Wuhan, the place where the pandemic started. We did a study last year for Wuhan and to introduce better cycling facilities. And what you see in China, already there was a massive movement to get all the Chinese back on the bike again. And I'm very sure that the reaction, the response to the pandemic will be that this strategy will be enforced. Public transport, of course, is a difficult issue. Public transport, the basic of public transport is that people are near each other, and we have to find ways to deal with the new normal in public transport. It's still a problem. Next, please. Water and basic services, very important to keep them, because the availability and continuity of water supply is important for hygiene, and hygiene is the basis for to get the pandemic down. Here you see a picture of Yangon, where they introduced hand washing basins in public areas. It can be very helpful, and many cities are doing that. And I think in the new cities, these provisions for hygiene will be enforced. Sewage, based on the present facts, there's no danger of COVID-19 in sewage. It can be in it, but that's only in limited amounts. People should take care working in sewage plants, but for the general public, it's not a big issue. Next, please. Physical distancing. It's important to mention it's physical distancing. It's not social distancing. It's physical distancing, but social solidarity. And the big question in how we can achieve that in the cities of the future. It's really interesting to see how many inventive ideas are developed now by cities themselves. You see that there in a lot of cities we got the one-way streets for pedestrians. You see it here to the right. In the Netherlands, even roundabouts for pedestrians to get them on the right side of the street. On the left side, you see a picture of a takeaway in Bangkok, where everybody waits for their turn to get their food in the mall. There are so many ways to do it, and it would be interesting also with all the people here in this webinar to share and to make an inventory of all those solutions which are found now. Next, please. And of course, the big question is, should it be completely organized, or should the whole basis of physical distancing be that we take responsibility themselves and then we find our own solutions for it instead of a government who is making all the rules? In a wider context, there's also this double thing with air quality. It starts to be proven that in places with poor air quality, there is more transmission of COVID-19. At the other hand, of course, when there are lockdown restrictions, then the air quality dramatically improves. And here you see some schemes, you may be familiar with it, in China. And on the left graphic of UK, it has fallen dramatically. And yeah, also the fact that you don't hear all the time airplanes above your head, a lot of people like that very much. Next, please. Preparedness. Preparedness is an important element of the three-layer strategy. Preparedness, we have to prepare for a second wave, and there's a fair chance that in countries which are now going to summer, when there's the fall or the winter, there will be a new wave of COVID-19. But we also have to prepare for next pandemics. There can be COVID-20, there can be COVID-21, and we have to be sure that it will not be a disaster and a crisis like this one. And when we do it in the right way, we can be sure that it will be a better process. Of course, medical facilities, there should be temporary or permanent quarantine facilities, but also it has to do with management, because all these things are physical, but at the same time, there should be a management system in place, and also finance, of course. UN Habitat also always have these different layers with physical management and finance. And I think it's very important to have these elements together when you talk about urban planning in the future. Next. What we learned is the importance of doing things smarter. We talked about smart cities, but it's amazing how now everybody is connecting with webinars, with conference calls. And imagine only today how much carbon dioxide we don't use by just doing it the way that we're doing it now. And it would be definitely great if we can keep some of that and for our future cities. And there are many ways to find smart solutions. And the interesting, of course, that this is the momentum to find these smart solutions, to work with communication, but also to energy, water management, transportation, and to do it in a more clever way. Next, please. And that's a bit the whole message. But of course, this message is very much related to the political and economic social context that you're living in. What we've seen is horrendous situations in countries where the harsh reality is shown here on the pictures, especially in informal settlement and slums. People are forced in situations which are really inhuman. Also, not only directly, but also indirectly, for instance, the food provision. And one of the challenges of UN Habitat is to find how, but it can only be done in cooperation with the governments, how these situations can be dealt with. And what you see that, for instance, the way that migrant workers were sent back to their places. In India, I mean, you see the picture, it's only spreading the disease. Next, please. And important to do it inclusive planning and management, because the people who are really suffering are the disabled. There's a very good series of webinars by the disabled organizations, which highlight the solutions which also can be found, for instance, for blind people, for deaf people. It's very difficult with communication and access, of course, when you you're not able to completely communicate. Gender is an important issue, the way that people are kept home, and especially domestic abuse has been a problem and is a problem in lockdowns, but also the access to basic services. Women in many countries are the ones who are fetching the water. They cannot go out anymore. The way that communal toilets are used in many places, it's really difficult to deal with in lockdown situations. But maybe the ones who are most vulnerable presently are the migrant workers. In this series of webinars, we also had a webinar with presentation of Action Aid from my co-chair of the World Urban Campaign. It's horrendous what happened there. It's especially people who are not registered. They completely are out of the system, and they are the ones who pay the price for the pandemic. Next, please. Urban models, and I think that many of you who are listening are urban planners, urban designers, many members of ISOCARP, and it's great that ISOCARP is also in the future working to find those new models. Of course, we have already a lot of models available when you talk about city where green is part of the system, finger cities, that kind of things. Then these are things which also are very useful in pandemic resistance. It brings also opportunities to situation. It brings greener cities with recreation nearby, especially cities. Here you see on the right Venice, which are completely overrun with tourism, can back to normal again, normal for the citizens. There's more space for cycling and pedestrians. It can be a job creator, sustainability. It can bring more economic diversity. The inner city can become more for tourists again. There can be local projects. Also, of course, urban agriculture can be part of the new system. The way that we care for people, a lot of the pandemic problems were in houses where there was care for old people. They were stuck together, and there the pandemic spread. So it's also important, I think, from a planner's point of view, to see how we can do this integration in the city. And for the new city, for the new areas that we are planning, is how to bring a sufficient green area in the cities to have this outdoor space for people to find their livelihood nearby. The whole idea is to build back better. It's a motto, next please, a motto of UN Habitat, build back better, which has been used in many crisis situations. And that would be the conclusion of this presentation. It's not only important that we go back to a safe new normal, but especially important that we go to a safe and attractive new normal, building back better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bert. A lot of elements here, and the main areas to be rethought for us as planners. You are basically going back to the essence of planning at the beginning with the keywords that are prevent, adapt, protect, prepare. These at the end are what planning is about. And also you outline the complexity of the response. Focus on health, proof cities. At the same time, there should be livable cities with freedom. So it's very complicated. And suddenly I see the words protection, safety to be the focus. It is complex for when you consider, for example, public transport at the heart of planning in the last 50 years. So how do we deal with public transport? And then a set of new rules have to emerge, rethinking density, social distancing. So as you said, we need to have an inventory of solutions and new models. So this is complicated. We're at the beginning of the road. So now I would like to invite Ian Tant, who is a Vice President of the Commonwealth Association of Planners. Over to you, Ian.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. First of all, can I say thank you for inviting me into this session. If we can go to the next slide, I thought it'd be helpful just to give you a little bit of background about myself, so you understand where I'm coming from speaking. I am a practitioner. I was a partner in one of the UK's leading planning and design consultancies, a firm called Barton Wilmore. Christine, if we can go to the next slide, please. Following my step down from Barton Wilmore in 2016, I became a board trustee of the Royal Town Planning Institute here in the UK. And indeed, I was the president last year. I'm now the immediate past president. And I have been appointed on behalf of the RTPI as the UK Vice President of the Commonwealth Association of Planners, which represents some 40,000 planners across 57 nations around the globe. So with a very broad reach. If we can go to the next slide. Bert's already touched on quite a lot of these points, but I think it's worth just highlighting what have been some of the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, with lockdowns, curfews, people trapped in their homes for long periods of time, the closure of shops and businesses and business premises across wide parts of the globe, and alongside that, a great increase in online shopping, in online purchase of services. We've seen in quite a number of countries cessation of public transport. We rely in our major cities heavily on public transport, but that has very much been curtailed in the last few weeks and months. We have had the issue of social distancing, which is not just a challenge in buildings and in shops, but has also become a challenge in our public parks and open spaces. And there has been a particular issue with the capacity of green spaces in a number of major cities, simply unable to cope with the number of people who have to rely on them for their recreation, for their access to healthy exercise. But we've seen also some significant benefits, and again, Bert has touched on this, the fall in carbon emissions, and I'll come back to the scale of that in a moment, the improvement in air quality, the added sense of peace and quiet in our cities, all of which has produced benefits that we would wish to, I think, to see continued into the future. So if we go to the next slide. We're already seeing now many governments around the world start to look seriously and urgently at recovery, principally in terms of how do we address the economic responses. But there are some serious risks for us as planners, as designers, as communities, if we're not careful, an unthought through and guarded approach. First of all, there is a risk of governments reaching for projects which are already available to start. And some of those projects, perhaps some of those road buildings or infrastructure projects, may very well be projects which are at odds with the broader objective of reducing carbon emissions, of addressing climate change. We're seeing wariness of people in moving back to public transport. In some cases, and here in the UK, for instance, the government having encouraged people to go back to work when they can work away from home, but still advising them to avoid public transport. There is a risk alongside that. We see a flight to the suburbs, a flight to the edges of cities. where people decide that the problems of living in the city are such that they would prefer to live in the countryside around the city. This, of course, will be an option for the wealthier parts of our society, but does not address the needs of the broader set of society, and if we're not careful, adds to the issues of carbon emissions and climate change. And again, we've seen arguments in terms of de-densification of the cities. Now, this doesn't become an absolute issue. It's not about saying we can either have dense cities or everything is spread widely, but it does need thought in our approaches to design as to how our cities are made more livable and made healthier, while still maintaining the essential aggregation of people, services, and so on that make cities so attractive and so livable. So next slide, please. So at the Royal Town Planning Institute and in the Commonwealth Association of Planners, we've started to turn our thoughts to what is needed in terms of how we move forward, in terms of how we plan and design in the light of the pandemic. And I think here there are 4 points which particularly occur from the experience at the moment. One is about our housing standards, not only across many of our cities with no control over housing standards, with the slum living that Bert has already referred to, but even in a number of our more developed cities in first world or global north cities, we've seen governments moving to deregulate planning. And that's led to very small scale housing with poor internal space, poor ventilation, with issues over energy security and access to broadband, all of which become vitally important for people trapped within their homes in order to maintain access to work, services, schools, and so on. So the first thing I would suggest as what is needed is a move to devise minimum housing standards, which we should be encouraging all governments to adopt. The second is the move to active travel. And here, some really positive examples of this around the world. The top photograph here is from New Zealand, where road space has started to be repurposed for cycling. The New Zealand government, I think the first in the world to invest in this, but something which has rapidly spread to other countries all the way around the globe. Here in the UK, we're now seeing very active use of cycling and road space repurposed, and it's to be hoped that that becomes a more permanent fixture. We see the need for urban green space. The photograph here of Sydney, Australia, with the very dense centre of the city immediately alongside a very attractive park. And it's that sort of green space which I think Bert's referring to as being necessary for, for a healthy city, for a greener city, for a place that is immensely livable. But there's an opportunity as well, and that lies in reshaping our city centres. I think in a number of nations, there is now a fear, but also an opportunity that a number of the businesses that are in our city centres, both in terms of shops, but also in terms of offices, with people working from home, with the use of online shopping services, we may see a reduced demand for business space in the city centres. And that provides us with the opportunity to reshape a number of our cities, to look actually in the centre for a place where we can create more green space, where we can create more homes, where there is a really exciting opportunity, I think, to look at replanning the very heart of a number of our communities. So next slide, please. And this is my last slide, but it returns to that issue about climate change and climate action. Looking at what's happening around the globe at the moment, the International Energy Association has forecast that the level of carbon emissions around the world will fall by about 8% in 2020. To put that into context, the Paris Accord, with the objective of limiting the rise in temperature around the globe to 1.5 degrees Celsius, requires each year in this decade a reduction in carbon emissions of 7.6%. So what we can see is that by accident rather than intention, we are actually going to achieve and exceed that in the current year, 2020. The issue is that we need to maintain that throughout the decade. And that therefore means that it's essential that we have a green recovery from the pandemic, that we have a maintenance and continuation of all those benefits of improved air quality, reduced traffic flow, increased space for active modes of transport, all of which contribute not only to a green recovery, but to actually a much greener way of living and a much healthier lifestyle for all of us in cities right the way around the world. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. I think it was really good because you started to guide us to what is needed. How do we move forward? You advised to focus on minimum housing standard, active travel, green space, and revisit city centers. This is really, I mean, the main direction of the recovery, and your notion of green recovery all makes sense. I think that's really good in terms of recommendation for the next steps. Thank you, Ian, for that.
Okay, thank you.
So now I would like to invite Eric Ribrecht, who is a senior architect and regional urban planner at Institut Paris Région. Eric, over to you.
Merci. Thank you very much for the invitation. As you know, we are Institut Paris Région is part of WOC as lead partner, HPF, IUCN, ICOMOS, and other international networks. And we have cooperation with 20 or 25 cities, Asia, and different parts of the world, just with some ideas. So my presentation, just to say that a city will live with the COVID and other pandemics. So, and probably there will be more. So pandemia should be considered as a permanent risk with different crises, like other that will come afterwards. The good news is that with this crisis, health and well-being thematics will come back at the top agenda of city managers. It should be put at the center of the planning process because, as it is noted by WHO and UN Habitat in the last report, because planning has a central role in the prevention of diseases. Crisis reveals vulnerabilities of our cities with high connectivity, congestion, mass transit, concentration of activities and services, density, air pollution, inequalities, crowded housing. All of that are factors of risks for pandemia. But the best response during the crisis have also been done by the largest and among the most connected cities in the world, with Tokyo, Seoul, Taipei, Singapore, Hong Kong. So there is the relation with this vulnerability is not so clear. We see that local authorities, businesses, and communities were very reactive, and they are the most agile actors to deliver responses to communities, the population, and they play a vital role despite of the national bureaucracy. We can say that put the first image, please. The previous one, the red one. Come back with the slide. The global population will continue to increase in cities due to the low capacity of rural areas to accommodate demographic growth and to offer jobs. The main feature of our century is the metropolis. Every year, we have 20 additional metropolis of more than 500,000 inhabitants. Every 2 years, we have one more megacity of more than 10 million. Metropolis and megapolis are not managed like state government or municipalities. They are fragmented, without permanent boundaries, not really governed, and they necessitate governance systems and flexibility. This is the reality of our context today, and it will be the same with and without pandemics. These metropolis are building shared strategies that engage all actors, public, private, communities that cross territories, tier levels, and sectors. And so we have to think about the reaction of our cities at this level, at this scale of the city regions. Next slide, please. The pandemic generated a huge economic crisis with public debts that will increase from 20 to 40% in different countries. This will put more money in the financial economy, with one part that will be injected in real estate, generates about 10%, 8 to 10% of to secure investments. So the effect of finance on cities will increase with more luxury apartments, well-designed expensive districts, merchandisation of urban services and empty apartments or ghost new towns that are well-designed and not affordable. Before the crisis, there were already 20% of empty apartments in China, 30% in Egypt, 25% in Dubai, 18% in the city of Paris, and that was increasing, and it will increase more, probably. In the same time, the economic crisis will increase unemployment and reduce fiscal capacities, making well-designed cities less affordable for a lot of people. More poverty will increase informality. Well-designed and good planning that is promoted by the new urban agenda should be reconsidered with a focus on planning with the poor or planning the future informal settlement. What place will give to this informal settlement in the future of our cities? Because the well-designed city is too expensive. This is probably the biggest challenge for planners of the present century. Next slide, please. The digital economy is speeding up, and the crisis increased the speed up of the digital economy, delivering useful services for communities during and after the crisis. Large changes are occurring in behaviors with teleworking, e-shopping, e-education, e-government, smart grid, smart mobility. Teleworking is becoming the normal for probably a quarter to 1/3 of workers in a lot of cities. The effect on cities are related to their connectivity and accessibility. There is a focus on the quality of life in the suburbs by local authorities, and also on well-connected intermediate cities, well-connected to the metropolitan areas. Large concentration of jobs in CBD or large facilities like universities, shopping malls, stadiums, theaters will be reconsidered for more mixed use and better utilization during the daytime. Mass public transport and logistic will be transformed in favor of local delivery and soft mobility. Due to the size of the metropolitan areas, large cities are more fragmented, more deconcentrated, with more secondary centers and more importance to be done to well-connected secondary cities around large cities and on economic corridors. This is the scale of the cities that we are facing today. Next slide. Next slide. The crisis offers opportunities for shifting urban policies. the Green New Deals that was discussed before the crisis will be speed up in Europe, in France, and other countries. The big shift on city trajectory are possible and eased on economy, decarbonization, resilient city, nature in city, soft mobility, circular economy, tactical urbanism, urban agriculture, precariization back of production, local participation, bottom-up process in planning, inclusiveness, ecology, and decentralization of the main feature of this big shift. And a lot of local authorities are using the crisis to go forward on different things that they have in mind before. Most of local authorities are focusing on the proximity level with experimentation now in these days during crisis at large scale for cycling routes, adding 650 kilometers of fast tracks cycling routes in Paris region, 100 miles for social recreational streets in New York, safety larger sidewalks in Toronto, the city of 15 minutes concept developed in Paris and is adopted by numerous cities of C40. And this is the sign of the proximity level that is focused on by cities. But there is a large contradiction that will appear between the smart green city paradigm and finance. The financial system should be regulated to allocate money for sustainable development and public goods in priority to profits. This contradiction should be dépassé, should be overlooked. Next slide. The last one. So in such large uncertainty and huge shifts of behavior, planning cannot be static. It is not enough to advocate for compact, connected, inclusive, resilient, and integrated cities and territories. Managing cities should be flexible and proactive. Specific tools for monitoring cities are essential. Permanent planning agencies and open platforms are necessary to develop knowledge on urban dynamics, to develop innovation, to build shared strategies, and to offer capacities to face new crises that will come with other pandemics and the climate change. The agility of cities is the key to face future crises. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That was really interesting. And you took us to the big picture first by reminding us that we are a world of metropolis. And what if metropolis could cooperate for more strategic planning, looking at the champions? So this is really an important part. You're also warning on the effect of the crisis and the financialization and increase of informality. And you are saying basically that planning for the poor is going to be the biggest challenge for the future for planners. And at the same time, the crisis is an opportunity to accelerate the Green New Deal. These are very important questions, and I think that can be taken as key points to build on recommendation for the future. Thank you, Eric, again. And I would like to give the floor to Didier Van Kussen, who is director of the ISOCARP Institute. Over to you, Didier.
Thank you very much, Christine, and thank you for this invitation to join and contribute to the discussion of this Urban Thinker Campus. So my congratulations for this and for the series of different Urban Thinker Campuses, which have been done already. This is really great. I would like to deliver a short contribution from the ISOCARP Institute, maybe the next slide, and explain you in a nutshell what is the Institute. So the ISOCARP Institute has been established 2016 as a research branch of the ISOCARP Society, which has been presented before, the International Society of City and Regional Planners, with members all over the globe. And this research branch is focusing on implementing the projects and capitalizing the urban knowledge and the knowledge of all the members. So within the Institute, we are focusing on research, on practice and academy. And I will show you later an example what we are doing when we are talking about capacity building. The next slide. But before I explain what is the Institute doing, I would like to share with you some reflections, some ideas which we can maybe discuss, and we can also focus during the next stage and the Q&A discussion. First of all, it is evident that the pandemic is demonstrating the contradictions and the vulnerabilities of the globalized system we have at the moment. As we have one of the worst crises that has hit the humanity in the recent history. And more importantly, we can see now all over the globe the social, economic, and cultural consequences. And well, we can see also that this crisis can reveal the weaknesses and the failures of our systems and governance. So in a sense, for all of us, it's not bad. It's a wake-up call and telling us we have to think our cities differently. We have to think also, and this is the next point, we have to consider that we are also in a climate crisis. And there is a relationship between the health protection and the climate and species protection. I don't know if you are all aware about that, but this pandemic is a consequence of our persistent and excessive intrusion in nature and ecosystems. We are transforming considerably our ecosystems and also during the illegal wildlife trade. And it is obvious, and it was obvious, and it was just a matter of time that something like this, a global event, was going to happen. I don't know if you are also aware about that, but when we are destroying all these ecosystems like tundra, Arctic, etc., we may also face a lot of challenges from previous centuries, Paleolithic ages, keeping all the viruses, etc. So we are facing big challenges also in the future. So what we have to think, we have to consider that we did to ourselves, and we have to reflect, and we have to develop a new kind of decision-making and policy-making processes, which are much more adaptive, flexible, and integrated. When I'm saying adaptive, flexible, and integrated, I'm saying also bottom-up processes. At the moment, we are too much focusing on top-down processes, and I think that the planning processes are also confirming this dimension. So in a sense, we need to learn, we need to plan, and we need also to implement our cities differently. Next slide, please. And well, we were talking also about preparedness. And preparedness, it is essential. And I think Bert was mentioning that in his presentation. And this preparedness, this lack of preparedness has been perfectly reflected in the press since weeks. And this is confirming that our system is really not adaptive, not flexible, and still not thinking integrated. Next slide. So some ideas how we can think and how we can approach our cities differently on the two levels, maybe on the hardware and on the software. When we are talking on the hardware level, we are, of course, focusing on green spaces and public spaces, nature-based solutions, which are essential for the future of our cities. And of course, related to essential social infrastructure for support and care. But when we are talking also about green spaces, we have to think about green corridors, improving air quality, for example, green networks in cities. We have to avoid also too much interferences with zoonoses. We know that. And we have also to have a less intrusion in nature capital. But further, we need to develop and to select urban areas and to develop it in a more sociable and pleasurable way. I'm talking here about the different aspects of quality of life. And of course, talking about local activities and urban gardening, what is reflected at the moment in all over the globe. And what Eric was mentioning, this is also, and also Jan was mentioning that the housing stock, we have to reconsider also the housing stock and also review our approach, maybe to focus more on decent housing and avoid the lack of social justice. And of course, the need of digital infrastructure and remote working conditions should be improved. On the software level, on the decision-making levels, what I was mentioning before, the adaptive policy documents are needed when we are talking about more flexibility for cities facing this kind of crisis. But I'm also talking about leadership, capacity, local production, innovative way of thinking, and capacity building of decision makers. Next slide. So what is the Institute, ISOCARP Institute doing? As I mentioned before, so we are focusing on research, on practice and academy. These are the three pillars of the activities. On research, we are focusing on project research, mainly nature-based solutions and academic exchange. On practice, we are doing the technical assistance and the urban labs program, the urban planning advisory teams. And academy, this is what I'm going to explain you in the next slide, the online education process. We are doing the seminars and going on the ground and involving also the citizens. Next. Yes, this previous one, please. Yes, this is a current project we are doing within the Institute. This is a capacity building program to be implemented June and July for Indonesia. And you can see here the principle of the capacity building. This is, so to speak, COVID-proof. It's a COVID-proof system where we can learn, we can plan, and we can implement differently. First of all, on the first module, we are doing this kind of offline training. It means that we are offering research contribution, case studies, videos, and expert interviews to decision makers, local, subnational, and central government officials. On the second step, we do online training, which is intensive training with the actors and with the decision makers. This is, you can see here, there's 5 modules of different, on different levels. And on the third, if we can do it, and I really hope we can do it, we have the on-site training with intensive workshops and hands-on, where we can confirm and we can discuss exactly what has been discussed before. It means this is really implementing the previous knowledge sharing prepared before on an online way. So this is, in a nutshell, what the ISOCARP Institute is doing. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Didier. Thank you for this very good presentation, underlying the key direction for action and talking about adaptive, flexible, integrated planning in response to this crisis. And as you said, dialogue is needed, bottom-up approaches, capacity building. And we have a lot of planners in the room at the moment. I mean, we have 315 participants now. I'm sure a lot of you are interested and would like to know more and would like to move forward. And I think the Institute is probably a very good avenue for you.
Thank you, Christine.
Now, yes, thank you, Didier. Now, by the way, as attendees, you can ask questions in the Q&A of this webinar. So please do so. You can directly direct your question to the panelists. We'll have very little time for interaction at the end, so I think the best is you maximize and you put that in the Q&A. I'd like now to introduce to welcome Javier Tonner, who is the urban development specialist at UN Habitat. Javier, are you here?
Good morning, good afternoon,
Hi.
everyone. Hello, Christine.
Hi, good morning, Javier. So over to you now.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's really great to be here and to see some friends, colleagues, at least online. The good thing of being the last one is, or being at least the last one of this part, is that you can build up on the comments that have been done with a lot of good comments. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the work that I'm going to present is the effort of UN Habitat, and specifically on the planning and design, trying to think through this pandemic and structuring recommendations of areas that we see as the key areas to intervene. Next one, please. So in a way, the pandemic has just affected cities as the epicenter of where pandemia has happened. Now, the foundational principles of our cities are density, proximity, and social interactions, and those are the areas that the pandemics have where they have a larger impact. Even with cities being these places of interaction, of agglomeration, I think the main message that has come for us is a message of cities need to continue being secular. They need to continue being dynamic spaces. They need to reflect those freedoms of expression. Citizens should continue to exercise their agency and demand better services to confront or to be able to be more resilient to these kind of situations. But still, cities should remain, and as we've gone through our principles, should remain those compact, those places where there is an interaction, where there is an opportunity for economic, for social inclusion. But this pandemic has also shown us, and it was mentioned by everyone, the inequalities and the inadequacies of our cities, which we need to focus on and which we need to improve. The main lessons that we have seen are that our cities need more than ever to be inclusive, to be self-sustaining. So self-sustaining and circular economy is something that we've really learned and we've really seen from this pandemic. And also the resilience that was already mentioned by Bert and many of our presenters today. Next one, please. We have tried to structure our thinking by scales. As we are many planners here, I hope that this is appreciated. And what we've seen is that starting from the regional or metropolitan, or so let's say system of cities scale, as national scale, we've seen the importance of establishing those urban or rural-urban linkages, the importance of instruments such as national urban policies, the importance of instruments or let's say ways of managing the territory or designing the territory as system of cities. Now, in an economy and in a system that is hyper-connected with globalized markets, we see more and more the importance of having these local markets and this interconnectivity between rural areas, between cities, to really make sure that these flows can also be complementary and be an option in case of pandemics, no? Giving more resilience to cities, giving more resilience to rural areas. Also, the importance that is linked to this very first point of the intermediate and tertiary cities. So it's really key, and most for every country, but also especially for countries that are growing, for developing countries, to focus on intermediate cities, to focus on tertiary cities, to focus the investment and the priorities of our countries, not only in mega cities, where it becomes more and more difficult to manage, more and more difficult to find solutions in this time of pandemic, but to rely on a system of cities and to rely of this interconnectivity. And the next slide, please, talks about something that was raised already by Ian, by Didier, talking about the intrusion in ecosystems, about the green recovery. So we see that at this regional scale, the continuity of our open spaces, of our green-blue networks, is a way to also relieve this stress that is created during these situations. These are the places where we have been allowed, or that has been possible to access due to the policies of restriction that have been created. So it's really the space for the city and for the regional areas to go to. And also related to that and to the climate change issues that were raised, these areas and more when we look about these principles, we see that they are principles that have been holding before and that we should still focus today. You know, mitigation of heat island effects, natural drainage, water provision, nature-based solutions are ways to become more resilient as regions, but also to make sure that these spaces are preserved and that there is no more intrusion, and that we are able to find a balance between urbanization and between ecosystem preservation. Next one, please. At the city scale, and I think as planners, one of our main concerns is when we talk about urban form and urban function. We have always, next one please, a slide that we show with the different patterns, with the different how cities are designed, how we use our policies and our plans to design different patterns of cities, and we refer mostly to the private sphere that has become very key and very relevant during the pandemic, but also the public sphere. We see here different typologies with different amounts of land allocated to streets. So how in these kind of situations, in these contingencies, the public space becomes important, and the way that we shape our cities is critical for access to services, mobility, proximity of public spaces. Now, we still think that the first model that we see here in a wise combination with the more or a less dense areas could be the solution for our cities. No, a wise combination of the different typologies. The next one, please, which is the one that we are referring. We talk about densities and minimum standards. So it's a combination of that density with the combination of in the private sphere, in the housing, with access to basic services and open spaces. It's really important, and we've seen that without this proper access to services, it's not possible to implement lockdowns. It's not possible without financial or without economic means to ask groups of population to remain in lockdown. So we've seen in many of the countries that we work that for these measures to happen, there needs to be support, there needs to be a public intervention, and there's also needs to be an improvement in the next years in the access to services and in the access to economic opportunities. And public transport remains essential. So of course it has been seen as a hotspot for viruses transmission, but many cities have been very wise and reactive in setting new ways or new alternatives for public transport. So increasing the way the hygiene inside of this, providing new options such as extending biking lanes, a very good example in Colombia and many other places. So these good practices are also good practices that we should take for the next years in order to continue planning with this in mind. And then, I mean, of course, the key question that was made was the capacity and the access of the healthcare system. I think it's an important point here. As urban planners, in the face of this pandemic, we need to work more and more with epidemiologists. So that was in the origin of our DNA. And I think we should, to some extent, recover the way that epidemiologists and the healthcare is included in our plans, is included in our expertise, or working together with colleagues and with teams that bring this knowledge to the table. Next one, please. At the neighborhood scale, we see again the principles that we have been advocating for. We see that the self-sustaining neighborhoods that are able to to also produce in terms of energy, in terms of food. The mixed use becomes key in these kind of situations where people can access, can walk, and don't have to go for long distances to access the main services that they require. And then the compactness and these models that Eric was presenting of the 15-minute city, right? The public space becomes key. It's key for our health. So in our lockdown, we've seen that it's quite complicated to remain in our houses, depending on the quality of the houses and how much access we have to terraces. Public spaces are key components, and we need to design them in a way that allow both for interaction, but also in this kind of pandemics, to be able to redesign them and to be able to adjust different uses. And then how to rethink and how to see our plans and the urban voids that we have, the land that is not used, the common spaces, how we can use them, how we can appropriate them as communities and turn them into things such as, example, urban agriculture or areas for recreation, how to use those common goods in a way that can be, that they are not just locked, they are not just not reachable, but that we can find ways to manage those spaces in a way to respond to these situations. And at the neighborhood scale, which would be the last scale that we are going to deal with, sorry, this would be the next one, the next slide. It would be at the building scale, sorry. Then there are a few considerations also that were made here in terms of minimum space standards. So it was already mentioned by most of our colleagues, how important it becomes, the quality of housing. Many of the previous pandemics had an impact in standards of life, in ventilation, in sanitation. I think that we should find a way to balance the market and the market trends in order to provide housing that has also these components of access to open spaces and the quality, and to recover those common spaces that can keep us in our private sphere, but with contact with the city. We've seen also the importance of access, but not only to what we consider basic services, but to internet, to ICT. So the way that a lot of people have managed, or fortunate people have managed to keep on working, is through these services, and it becomes more and more important that houses have this kind of facilities, these kind of spaces that allow for work, that allow to conciliate the family with the work, right? And the last one is also...
Can you conclude, yeah?
Yeah, I'm finishing, thank you. And then the last one is related to the buildings and the Great Digital Startup that was mentioned by Ian. So let's take this as an opportunity also to look at the way that we design buildings, that we design cities, to come back to this, or to remain with this sustainable and energy efficient way. Thank you very much, Christine.
Okay, thank you, Javier. We have exhausted much of our time now. I don't think we can go into the roundtable, but I would like to invite for question and answer. Before, I'd like to thank Javier. It was a really interesting approach to taking us to the different scales, regional, city, neighborhood. It's a good framework for future action, I believe. And looking at different system of cities, different level, intermediate, tertiary cities, it's really important, and to look at the role of blue-green network in a region. So this was not addressed before in the former presenters' presentation. So I think these are very important points. So I'd like to invite, I would like to invite people. So I believe we had a request for speaking by Mesho Prasad. Mesho, do you still want to speak?
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, everybody.
Yes,
Actually,
yeah.
I just very quickly, because I'm in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong was mentioned in a couple of the presentation, and you know, we are actually, the curve is flattened. So I just want to quickly share with you my experience here. So others, and I've read some of the questions, others are asking how are we dealing with this in real time. First and foremost, in Hong Kong, absolutely good governance, and I know that we can define that in many ways, but good governance right now, excellent healthcare system. And the two other most important thing is communication. I think there's a lot of communication from top to bottom. And as a commuter, and by the way, I'm using the public transport system, and I'm shoulder to shoulder in the metros, as you can imagine. And there are signs everywhere from the top of the metro all the way down until you get to your office. So lots of communication. And also the people believe, and they know, and they take responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Jane Katz would like to speak. Jane Katz is from Habitat for Humanity. Jane?
Morning, good afternoon. Excellent presentations. I would like to find out a little bit more about, I think these recommendations are terrific, but how are you going to monitor, and are you building in different types of indicators or ways to measure your success in implementing these activities? Thank you.
Thank you. I will take another question. I see there is Mohammed Ghulam Mortaza. Mohammed, if it's a question, please, or a quick comment. You are muted, Mohammed, you are muted. Well, okay. Anybody else? There is Adrian de Jesus. Adrian? Adrian Kusuma. Please go ahead, Adrian. Okay, Adrian is not speaking. I'm muting him. Okay, any other question? I see Aoun Piri. You want to say something, Aoun? You have to unmute yourself. Okay, Anwar. There is Anwar Ramli. You want to say something? Okay, I mean, so I'd like to invite the panelists to provide an answer to Jane. Anybody want to answer? Jane? No, the panelists, who would like to answer?
Well, to monitor the success of the measure we are taking, we are monitoring permanently with planning agency, producing indicators regarding that. Regarding the crisis itself in Paris, we produce every week some chronics on the experience of the population, the response that have been done, etc. And for the how to recover after the crisis, we're working on the rebound, the economic rebound, and how to implement the policy that is already ongoing to produce, for examples of bike lanes at large scale on hundreds of kilometers in Paris region and others. So we are permanently doing that because we are a planning agency. Like there is a lot of planning agencies in different metropolitan areas in the world. So this is, we're defining specific indicators for each policies we're producing.
Okay, anybody else who want to answer? Ian, yes, go ahead.
Really, just to back up what Erica's just said, I think there is a considerable amount of monitoring that goes on all the time by our planning agencies in the nations. The key thing, I think, is actually identifying what are the targets we want to achieve. So if we've identified minimum housing standards, if we've identified minimum standards of green space availability, those are the things we can then monitor against. I think the important thing for us over the next few months and the next year or so is to identify exactly what are the measures we wish to achieve. And then monitoring can take place by local governments, by national governments, by the various agencies as we move forward.
Okay, unfortunately, it's already past the time. So I would like to give a quick conclusion. Also, before that, I'd like to say that we didn't have enough time. We need much more time, but that's the beginning of a process. In June and July, we'll have more Urban Thinkers session, maybe more targeted, such as mobility, governance, capacity building. And just to say that you're invited to actually shape your own sessions. We have sent a call for proposal to all the World Urban Campaign partners. So you're welcome to apply. But I think as the takeaway from this session, we can see the importance to move forward from this crisis. What is important is cooperation between cities, between the champions. What can we learn from those who have managed to face a crisis? Importance of including the urban poor, the importance of including climate action, talking about the green recovery, and this crisis is an opportunity for that, to accelerate the green recovery, rethinking the essence of planning, protect citizens, prevent future crises, prepare for urban growth in a smart, harmonious, inclusive way, and being adaptive, flexible, integrated, and dialogue is needed. Bottom-up approach, capacity building, and look at particular issues like housing standard, mobility, to go back to Ian's areas of action, new city centers, new urban green space. So these are just keywords because we didn't have time, but I think it was a good start to elaborate on the direction of action, and all the different organizations are working from there, and the Institut Paris Région, UN Habitat with the Urban Lab, RTPI, CAP, Arcadis, ISOCARP Institute, all these organizations are working from their hand. And I think it's important that we continue in that area of, of collaboration, bringing the different points of view and building the response, because that's not something quick. That's not something we can fix now. And as Ian said, we need to be very careful. We shouldn't jump directly into conclusion and say we need to have much lower density. Is it the right response? We need to reduce public transport. No. So I think all this have to be questioned, have to be rethought, and we need more, this kind of gathering and reflection and collaboration. So I'd like to end this. Maybe Bert Smolder want to say a few concluding words, because he's the chair of the World Urban Campaign. So maybe Bert, over to you to conclude in last words. Thank you, Bert.
Last word. It is it was very interesting, and I think the presenters are also very complementary to each other. It shows the diversity and the richness of the debate, and I think it's very important what you just mentioned, that if we continue, there are these urban thinkers campuses, and maybe even on a general level we can include just a second like this one in the next series, because there is material enough to discuss. I want to thank, like I did already, Christine and the staff, Damien and Flossie. And well, I hope you can continue this for a long time, because it's very worthwhile. And thanks everybody for attending. It's 300 people, more than 300 people we had on this session. It would be great if people can send in all their ideas, because one of the things we learned is that cities and citizens are very inventive. And what you see that locally, both by local governments, but also in communities. A lot of inventions are made. I mean, we always think as planners and architects and designers that we can do it for cities and communities, but sometimes these cities and communities are so rich in inventing that we would like to hear from you locally and send in all the examples which are now invented for this better cities, safer and more attractive cities. And then we can put it all together and share it with everybody in this session. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Bert. A last word, please join the COVID-19 campaign of UN Habitat. Go to our UN Habitat website. You can join in as a participant, as an individual, as an organization, and share your action, and then we will continue that conversation. Thank you all, and have a nice evening or morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.